Remembering the life of longtime WJXT Chief Meteorologist George Winneling, the legendary weatherman passed away today surrounded by his family. He was 91. He was beloved in this community and became a trusted household name when he began forecasting at Channel 4 back in the early 1960s.
And with the sunshine, the temperatures went up. Currently outside, our temperature holding in the upper 80s, 89 degrees to be exact.
This evening, we're honoring his legacy, his many contributions to meteorology, and his commitment to community service. It is with heavy hearts we bring you the news of George Winneling's passing. He is considered a pioneer of weather forecasting, bringing you accurate updates and finding new ways to explain your local weather.
George retired from TV broadcasting in 2009. He spent 47 years as our chief meteorologist and was part of one of the longest-running local anchor teams on television. You, our viewers, came to love George not only for his forecasting, but for his humor and his passion for gardening.
The two chief meteorologists to follow after George, Richard and John, are here with us, and they're going to share their memories in a moment. Joining us now is Chief Meteorologist Richard Nunn and our former Chief Meteorologist John Gaughan, who recently hung up his Channel 4 barometer and worked closely with George for so many years. Richard, start with you.
I said during John's goodbye, one of the reasons that I came here, my grandfather traveled up and down the 95 corridor, could name many, many stations, but could not name the meteorologist. As an avid golfer, he was always watching these guys. And when I came and interviewed, and I got back home and I said, hey, I interviewed at this station, and he said, hold on, George Winterling? And he says, no, that can't be right. He says, I used to watch him. This was when my grandfather was in his late 80s. He passed away at 94. And he was like, no, it can't be the same guy because he was old when I was watching him. But man, is he good. And so I brought up the early version of the internet. I said, Granddad, here it is. And he looked and he was like, is he younger than me? Wow. It was all I had to hear from him, saying of all the people that he traveled up and down the eastern seaboard, it was George, and he would go and golf out at the beach when George said it was okay. And so that was really touching, and the reason I was here, but it's the impact of the people. I was at a grocery store line, and it was grandparents, their kids, and their kids' kids, 3 generations, and they all said the same thing, that they grew up with George, and people took him such to heart that this is one of the original of the JXT. It even has the JXT guide on the top here. I believe you called it the red letter one, right. And it's a hurricane guide. But what's amazing to me is, I'm not sure the circa date on this, but the edges are pristine. I mean, if this was a baseball card, this thing would be mint. Priceless because
Honest Wagner.
It's mint. Yes, somebody really took the time to preserve this and then sent a really nice note in saying, hey, I thought you would want this. And yes, absolutely want it, and thank you for sharing it.
Absolutely.
And John, I know you worked for many years hand in hand next to George.
And going back to 91, and as I talked about in the retirement in 93, just a brief period of time later, George and I were here together for the Storm of the Century, and it just kind of cemented our relationship, and that was really awesome. Began the whole story for myself personally. But keep in mind, I think this needs to be a celebration of George's life. He did so many things. He inspired so many meteorologists. Richard, myself, are just some of the people that he's inspired over the last 50 years.
I'm so glad that Mary mentioned George's mischievous sense of humor. Jennifer Waugh mentioned it too. When our team was George, Deborah Gianola, Sam Kavaris, and me, from time to time, George would start his weather report with a twinkle in his eye. He'd look straight at Deb and say, Deborah, it's windy. Hang on to your wig. Everyone knew Deborah Gianola did not wear a wig. Her hair was almost as famous as she was. She just looked at him and exclaimed, George. Now, the very first time I witnessed his mischievous sense of humor was way back in the mid-1970s. George was on the 6 o'clock news with pioneer newsman Bill Grove and sports director Mike Patrick, the guy with the long hair that's doing the 11 o'clock news. Some of you will remember leisure suits back then. Well, George came out to the anchor desk at 6 o'clock wearing a cranberry-colored leisure suit. He would say it was garnet, as in garnet and gold for his beloved Seminoles. Bill Grove took one look at him and in front of the television audience asked him, George, are you going to do the weather wearing your pajamas? The entire studio crew burst into laughter. Seriously. In the almost 35 years I worked side by side with this marvelous professional, I can't even begin to tell you how much I learned from him. What stands out to me the most, though, was his dedication every day to you, our viewers, whether he was painstakingly animating those plants going inside by themselves to avoid a freeze, or painting clouds on paper maps, or producing computer graphics. He always wanted to tell you the weather story as clearly as humanly possible. It was never about him. It was always about you.